No, that was yesterday. Trucks heading out, in fact, after several major freeway snow closures were lifted. Well, today's front page of the Los Angeles Times says historic storm gives SoCal the chills. We're north of downtown in Sun Valley. Some cars got stranded in floodwaters. The big fear today is around mudslides. The forecast calls for another 6 to 18 inches of snow in the Sierra Nevada today. And the storm is marching east. It's expected to bring severe weather to the south central Midwest. Tornadoes, in fact, are possible in Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and Missouri. Let's go to our friend NBC's Dana Griffin in Universal City. That's in SoCal for us. So, Dana, I know you have some incredible pictures to show us. Unbelievable to those of us who've grown up and know LA.
Oh my gosh, incredible. We're going to show that to you in just a moment. Good to see you again, Alex. I just want to show you this really quickly. We're at that same LA River corridor that we were yesterday at this exact same time where you saw that raging river flowing out to sea. This is really a great gauge for local residents who want to see just how bad the flooding is here. And now you can see the bottom of this concrete corridor. There's just a sliver of water that is slowly making its way. So it's dropped dramatically as the storm now heads east. Life-threatening flooding in the Golden State. In Southern California's Ventura County, multiple RVs swept into the river. Watch this dramatic rescue, one of several in the region. A driver stuck in raging floodwater clings to a rescuer. They're both hoisted, swinging in the wind before safely landing on solid ground. Saturday near Los Angeles, a dangerous light show. A live wire fell into the water, setting a car on fire. The historic winter weather walloped California with heavy snow.
Now we're having a little bit of trouble because the snow's making it slippery.
Torrential rain in some areas, nearly an entire month's worth in 48 hours. And strong wind gusts, creating blizzard-like conditions in the San Bernardino County mountains.
First time I've seen snow in a long time.
With San Francisco seeing its lowest temperatures in over a century, and Los Angeles experiencing its first blizzard warning in more than 30 years. In San Diego, several water rescues.
We just had a vehicle that was in the deep water, unable to drive out, and 2 occupants of the vehicle that needed to be rescued and brought back to dry land. So we anticipate doing this a few more times.
The stunning system now headed east toward Oklahoma City, Wichita, and Kansas City, where 9 million are at risk for large hail and even tornadoes. In Michigan, thousands remain without power from an ice storm earlier this week. Back in Southern California, the mess the storm left behind and the dangers the system could still bring to the area. Now, although the worst of it is over here in Southern California, like you mentioned, Alex, there's a new system that's going to dump heavy snow and wind all the way from Washington to Northern California. And there's also a threat as this storm that left the area heading east is going to hit an estimated 11 million people in the plains. That could lead tornadoes and 80+ mile-per-hour winds likely this evening. Alex?
Yeah, that is very frightening, particularly that some of these things may happen under the cloak of darkness. So heads up to everybody there. Thank you so much, Dana, for that. It is an issue that turned the red wave into a red whimper. Next, new proof Republicans learned nothing from the 2022 midterms.
It's pretty obvious that Mother Nature is lashing out, just as the Bible teaches that in the last days we will see signs in the heavens and signs upon the earth such as mankind has never seen before. These are all advisories or warnings that had been predicted by the Bible over 2,000 years ago to give you an example that Jesus Christ was and is God's only begotten Son. For some reason, these signs and these advisories have not been closely paid attention to for the past few years pertaining to the last days. And because of it, now these things are just ushering up onto society that I really did. I tried to give out advisories in 2007 towards major electrical disturbances that was going to be coming. My message was misscrutinized up in Kentucky to the point that they
of the
thought
region
that
getting several inches of snow. Authorities have not.
they obviously thought that I was going to create an electrical disturbance by shutting down a Kentucky dam. And
here on the ground say they're all.
I've also made predictions in 2005 that there was going to be a bloody road ahead, sending it to the 43rd President of the United States in regards towards where we are right now with all the shootings and killings and etc. You know, it was all based around, basically, especially since 2009, it's all been based around the fact that I've had a bunch of people around here that didn't want to accept the teachings that I started with, going all the way back to 1989, going public, but it was actually in 1983 towards involving myself pertaining to biblical Bible prophecies in regards toward the Antichrist, the one world government, the New World Order, the opening of the seals, the two witnesses, and etc. And if those that get a hold of this message don't understand that, then I would strongly advise for you to either come by 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, or get a hold of somebody that does know about end-time biblical Bible prophecies, because if you can't obviously sort out the truth in regards towards seeing these horrendous weather patterns that continue to keep bombarding not just America but the world all over, then obviously you're out of touch with reality. I seen a movie, I forgot the name of it now, and I forgot the actor's name now too, but it was a movie about Los Angeles having all these massive tornadoes coming into that area. California has had tornadoes, but not an outbreak of tornadoes like we see over here, either in mid or in the western continental over here. It's a possibility that some of that stuff that we have seen on TV that was dramatized, basically engineered by artificial intelligence or etc. It's a possibility that we could see stuff like that actually occurring out in California because of things becoming so abnormally unbalanced. And of course, these are not only because of the sorrows of the sin pertaining to the wickedness of mankind, but it's also pertaining to how that humanity has steadily rejected and been climate deniers, that has allowed this now to creep up onto society to the degree that now we're all suffering on account of it. But what even is more mind-blowing than that is that even 30 plus years later, I still don't have a support team. I still don't have a congregation. I still do not have people that believe in the Windmill Ministries missions here in the Western world. They talk the talk about peace, but in reality, they really never have been about peace, because if they did, they would have done already picking up the range towards grabbing the bull by the horns in regards towards the ministry, the founder of the ministry that God has ordained me to help to orchestrate. So, you know, as we sit and we watch things be torn apart and we watch things be taken out of perspective towards these massive major electrical disturbances, regardless whether it comes in one form or the other, you was told, you was warned, especially the people right here in Northwest Tennessee. You was warned, you was told. The people up in Kentucky, they was warned pertaining to electrical disturbances that took it out of context.
And say they're all for policy, they're all for change, but they really just want to know about the accountability. One thing that I do want to note here that we've been seeing on the ground more and more, just that level of distrust in what officials have been saying about the water, even here, city water, not just the well water. Everywhere you go around this town, there are free bottle giveaways, bottled water that has been going out to residents. People are donating this as fast as it is going out. I mean, behind me, you might be able to see some of it. We know further down the road at several churches, they're just giving away lots of this water, not just for drinking. A lot of people are saying they're using this for cooking, for bathing, for taking care of their pets. So 3 weeks out, and that is where things stand here on the ground. Still a level of distrust and skepticism.
Yeah, people understandably scared and nervous amidst the fallout from that train derailment. George Solis for us, thank you. All right, we have new information about 5 people killed when a medical plane crashed near Reno, Nevada. Those on board included a medical patient, a family member, a nurse, and a paramedic, along with the pilot. We now know the area near the crash site was under a winter storm warning on Friday night, with parts of the region getting several inches of snow. Authorities have not yet determined what caused the plane to go down. An investigation is currently underway. All right, good news for astronauts aboard the International Space Station who now have a new way home. The Russian spacecraft Soyuz safely docked on the ISS last night. It will serve as the new ride home for NASA astronaut Frank Rubio and 2 Russian cosmonauts as well. This comes after the original space capsule sprung a leak in mid-December and lost all of its coolant. All right, still ahead, everybody. COVID-era food stamp benefits end this week, leaving millions of Americans without the funds to feed themselves and their families.
Kamikaze drones and ammunition here to the Russians in Ukraine. That relationship deepening in a fast and disturbing way, Director.
I do want to say something about what she talked about, the communist and the Americans astronauts having a way to come home. She didn't make mention that the International Space Station got hit by a bunch of space debris. The way that I understand it, that caused a dislodging that could have been like 1,000 zillion million trillion times more worse than what it already was. Whenever you're up there floating around in space, along with I don't know how many thousands of satellites that are active versus all the hundreds of satellites that are disactive, basically out of control, just floating in any direction that they want to float in. Somebody didn't obviously put into the equation about having harder shields that would resist at least a light glow or a light scrape pertaining to possible running into this type of debris. In addition to, somebody should have figured out whenever they make a satellite, you should have a detonator button on the satellite. That way, if the satellite goes completely dead and dormant and there's nothing that you can do with that satellite other than keeping it up in space, floating it around towards possibly having the potential of being lethal or dangerous to other satellites or to the space station, they should have had a way for the satellite to have self-destructed whoever taken the ownership of putting the satellite up there to begin with. The satellite should have been blowed into little bitty pieces no bigger than a quarter, or maybe a $50, or maybe the size of your fist, rather than having big hunks of it up there that, like I said, is nothing more than a disaster waiting to happen. And that's what hit the space station, that ripped a big hole in one of the sides that released all the Freon, the air conditioner Freon. And I guess because maybe they was on the right side of the earth, that they really wasn't being projected by the sun directly, was probably the only reason why that they have survived it as long as they have, because that actually occurred right around the first of the year, was whenever that happened, and they really put a damper on it real quick towards not really talking a whole lot about it because of the seriousness of it. I guess they didn't want to get a whole lot of people down here on the earth majorly concerned about what was going on up there, so they basically sealed it off, just like whenever the woman a while ago, the mediator that was talking about it, never did mention how come the Freon was released to begin with. Well, that's why. There was a basically a wreck in space, debris wreck, that caused it. Very, 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 very unprofessional as far as I'm concerned towards the people that's working with these multi-million-dollar satellites. You know, you'd think that if you got a multi-million-dollar satellite and all else failed to the basically to the point that it becomes dormant, it's no longer any good towards something like that up there floating around in space. And to think that we're going to build some sort of a space station up in space and not having to encounter some of that space junk up there is really being very naive because of the amount of space junk that's up there right now floating around. And it is significant in how much it's up there floating around. Obviously, it must be significant enough that it's causing them to think this thing over again towards coming in and I don't know if they're going to repair it. I don't know how they're going to fill the after they do repair it, that if they can repair it, towards filling the I'm pretty sure it's R134 back into the system. Going to have some sort of way of bleeding it, of getting all the air out. Going to have some way or another of drying it as they're bleeding it. That way it don't have a lot of moisture content into it. And then you're going to have to put however much Freon is in there. I'm assuming probably, with it being a fuselage that big, probably about 20 pounds of Freon. I would estimate. I may be wrong about that now. I'm going to say at least 20 pounds of Freon to keep a whole fuselage like that cool. I may be wrong about that. But it takes about 4.5 to 6 pounds to keep a big van cool. A big customized van with an extended back cab on it. It takes about 4 to 6 pounds of Freon just to keep that van cool. And that's in basically conditions somewhere between 85 and 105 degrees. I don't know how hot it gets on the other side of the moon, directly into the sun. And I don't know exactly how big their fuselage is, bigger than an inside of a cabin of a van. But I'm pretty sure it's probably, give or take, I'm thinking probably 10, 12, maybe 15 times that big. So probably the amount of Freon that I just got through talking about is sure enough on a conservative level, and may not even be close to being that on a conservative level. I mean, that's a big unit up there floating around. You got people up there that live up there. They sleep up there. They eat up there. They go to the bathroom up there. I mean, it's basically a portable home, like an RV. I wish that NASA would have told more about it, and they may, because of them bringing them home now, since it's not such of a dire situation, they may actually be willing to talk to the public a little bit more about what actually occurred and how they're figuring on trying to repair it and etc. But like I said, they're still going to run into the same problem with all the debris up there that's basically out of control, because once the battery on them satellites run completely out, you basically lose control of the satellite to the point that it's just up there floating around. That's the reason why I said it should have had some sort of a destruction device on it, to where somebody down here on the ground, all they would have had to have done was press the button, and it would have blown itself up into a million trillion billion pieces, blowed it to smithereen. That way, if something was to have hit the space station, maybe it wouldn't have been so drastic.
Director Burns said, right?
All right, Alex Marquardt, thanks so much in Dnipro. Let's talk more about all this. Let me bring in retired U.S. Army Major Mike Lyons. Major, so good to see you. So the CIA director saying, Putin is pursuing military aid from China and possibly even Iran. What's your point of view here?
Well, he needs two things. He needs ammunition. 152 millimeter shells coming from China would go a long way with Russia, as they want to fight an artillery war right now. There's a stalemate along that front, and he needs a lot more ammunition. The second thing he needs is more people if he wants to go on this offensive. There's a natural boundary between the forces right now, and it exists with the Dnipro River there. You saw the Chinese, for example, hand over one of their proposals of trying to make peace. Is basically Russia has everything to the east of that Dnepro River. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese end up doing those two things, those drones and ammunition. That would really escalate the opportunity for Russia to go on the offensive.
So with that, it sounds like you're describing a Russia that's in trouble, a weakening Russia as it pertains to its arsenal.
Yeah, I think so. I think that time's still not on the Ukraine military side. However, if they can break through in different areas, I think the strategy that Ukraine has to do is attack the Russian military now. As Russia tries to take towns like Bakhmut, and as Ukraine tries to defend them, they can't take the high casualties there with their military. They've got to go after the Russian army. I think in places to the south to gain more leverage over potentially Crimea and locations that exist there. But there's no question that the Russian military is still in trouble.
Okay, just ahead of the weekend, 1 year mark, for this Russian invasion in Ukraine, and the U.S. commits another $2 billion in military aid.
What did they say? The Russian military is in trouble? Well, hoopala! Hallelujah! Good! Anybody that has committed such acts of atrocities the way that they have, any mediator that gets on TV that has any type of empathy or sympathy towards Russian sympathizers should be a disgrace at this point in time. It should absolutely be a disgrace. Why? Because of what we have seen them do to them poor people. And I promise you, if it would have happened to that mediator right there, either one of them, or their families, they would probably be jumping up and down right now in knowing that the Russian military government had basically backed itself into a corner. This should be all the more engaging into some sort of diplomatic talks and trying to get the Russian government to stand down. I don't know what the negotiations would be. I'm pretty sure that a great deal of people would have to go to jail at the very least. Some of them may be put to instant death because of what that they have done. And their main leader, President Putin, he would be on court. I don't know how that the court would go, but odds are international tribunal court would not be lenient whatsoever in what that they have engaged themselves into. They have brought this condemnation to themselves. The Russian government, by exacerbating basically all their, I guess you'd call it manpower artillery, combat artillery, hand-to-hand artillery, and now because of it, they're having to reach out to other people to help them out in military. So, by me saying that, if China, Iran, North Korea, or any of the above help Russia in the state that they're in right now, they should be looked upon as being an accessory to the war crimes. Even though they did not participate in the war on the front end, because they are willing to help a terrorist, a known terrorist group now, the same thing as the jihad or the Taliban or Saudi Arabia or any of the above, which I know they claim that Saudi Arabia is supposed to be our ally, but, as far as I'm concerned, our American government, our politicians has lost their freaking minds whenever it comes to that. But to me, this is my opinion, I got a right to my opinion. Anybody that is helping the aid of the enemy, you immediately become in the same status as the enemy, because now you are aiding and abetting the enemy. We know that pertaining to our laws over here in the Western world. If somebody had robbed the bank and they was running for their lives, and all of a sudden you seen them and you hollered for them, hey, come on over here, buddy, I'll hide you. And they got a whole bag full of money. And then after you get them in the house, hey, you mind splitting a little bit of that with me? Well, guess what? Even if the person didn't split none of the money with them, just the pure mere fact that you seen that bank robbery and you seen the person that committed the bank robbery and you didn't report by seeing that person, you become an accessory to the crime. That's exactly what I'm talking about, that if China, North Korea, Iran, whoever, if they embark towards wanting to help the people over in Russia, they should be looked down upon the same way as the rest of the world looks down upon the Russia, towards them being nothing but a bunch of bloody terrorists. And that's exactly what they are, that has impugnated this type of damage and this type of cruelty to innocent men, women, and children. It would have been different. It would have been different if we knowed that some of these, or even the majority of these attacks, would have been accidental. In other words, their missile went off stray, or they didn't aim at it just right, or maybe because of this building blowing up, it blew debris over here on this building and it caused damage to the people that was next door. That's not the case. That's not the case here. We know for a fact that civilian targets has been targeted again and again and again. We know for a fact that we have seen mass graves and we have seen young girls and women be raped, and their military basically acting like a bunch of vigilantes. This ain't how the military in America and the European military and other militaries respond whenever they're engaged in something like this. Rules of engagement means rules of engagement. And obviously, the people over in Russia did not want to abide by even coming close to the rules of engagement. So because of that, if anybody has any sympathy for President Putin or for his government towards what has went on, as far as I'm concerned, they should be classified in the same classification towards being part of the lowest of the scummest of the scum. And it wouldn't have been no different in classifying Saudi Arabia, when we know for a fact that out of the 28 or however many people it was that held up the airplanes, that we know for a fact that like 85 to 90% of them come from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia should have been held accountable. In addition to, now we know for a fact that the money trail was coming from Saudi Arabia that was financing a great deal of those terrorists. How come America is acting this way, or other nations that claim to be God-fearing nations, is beyond me. And if they don't think that they're opening themselves up for a big whammy coming from the heavenly kingdom, I mean, whenever I say stuff like, towards just get through looking at all the weather events, is very extremely uncommon. I ain't never heard of them having a blizzard warning in LA. I mean, I lived out there for all one summer in Thousand Oaks with my cousins out there. I know what LA's about. I know that at the time in 82, I think it was, 82, the drugs and the parties and the scam artists and all the above was the worstest of the worstest that at that time I, as a farm boy, had ever laid my eyes on. Of course, it was the first time that I'd ever went out west to begin with. I went out west, first stopped at Dallas, or out towards Dallas, Texas, and stayed about a month or so with my cousin out there. Things didn't work out there, so I went further on west to L.A., to Thousand Oaks, and visited his sister out there. She was married at the time to a computer hotshot that was basically a troubleshooter towards going into industry and cutting here and cutting there and cutting here and cutting there and adding this automated system and that automated system to the point that he saved the company not thousands but millions of dollars. And at the end of the game, he got a certain percentage off of that. Plus, she at the time was working down in Casino Valley, and she made a lot of investments in like pharmaceutical stuff and electronical stuff. And the way that I've been told, they're worth uku's of millions of dollars. I mean, her brother in Plano, Texas is worth quite a bit, but in comparison to her, there is no comparison to the two in how much that she's worth versus the value of what he's worth. And he's worth a pretty sharp penny himself, just to give you any kind of ideal. They had a nice swimming pool, like a 3-story house with a basement, had a big view looking over the Sino Valley, and probably, I don't know, 25, 30 minutes from there to downtown LA. Like I said, I brushed around a little bit in LA, and once I did that, I realized what type of activity that went on, especially whenever you wind up in one of the high rises up on the pin floor, whatever they call it, and you wake up and you didn't realize where you'd wound up crashing at the night before because you picked up a hitchhiker, and all of a sudden you're in this room and you hear all these people talking, and you get up and you walk down the hallway and you hear the voices get a little louder, and there's about 20 people in one room playing these songs off of at the time, this was in the early 80s, playing this song, a Yankee Doodle Dandy, and all these other different songs that are automatically played on these little watches. Scam artists talking to all these different customers, telling them that you had won this, but we need an address, and you're going to have to pay for the shipping, so be sure and give us your credit card number. It was a credit card scam artist thing that I woke up in the middle of. Some guy comes in there with a big robe on. He starts cooking all this luxurious Oriental food. Then the next thing you know, we wind up on top of the skyscraper with all kinds of beautiful, beautiful women all around, and people. I don't think I have to explain no more, but it didn't take me long till I figured out that I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. And I got the heck out of there, and got the heck out of that room, and got the heck out of that hotel, and got back in my little black van, and went back up to Thousand Oaks, and didn't say a word to nobody about what that I just got through witnessing pertaining to the drugs and the criminal activity and all the other stuff that was going on. That was basically my introduction of going down to LA, picking up a hitchhiker pretty close to where the beaches was. I don't remember the name of the boulevard or whatever, ocean line, whatever, but that was basically my experience towards going down to LA for the one and only time by myself. Other than that, I usually stayed up at Thousand Oaks and just participated in the little towns that surrounded Thousand Oaks towards getting involved and looking at this and looking at that, and I actually wound up with a girlfriend, believe it or not, for a while. Pretty nice looking little girlfriend. We hung around one another, give or take, for about 6 weeks before I decided to come back to Tennessee. But I'm very, very familiar with the weather patterns that goes on out in LA. And to see where they have recently got a blizzard warning and all the flooding, in which they need the water. They need the water. Thank God they're getting the water and getting the snow, because if they didn't get all that water and snow, it was just a matter of time before there was going to be a major migration of people that was going to be coming from the West Coast over to the East Coast, or going to maybe places in Denver, Colorado, or maybe going to Oklahoma or Kansas City, or maybe coming over here or something. I mean, them people was in a dire, complete dire water restriction dire situation last year. For surely to God, all the water, all the snow, all the everything else that has erupted just within the past 3 or 4 months since this winter has hit, for surely to God, it's going to help a little bit with the situation over there. But once more, whenever you go from a state that used to have about 20,000 people and now it's got like almost 60,000 people, the people that's drinking from the same pool of water, the pool of water is gonna diminish quicker than it would have been if you only had 20 million people versus almost 60 million people. In addition to all the droughts, in addition to all the irregular weather patterns that I tried to tell people about, that I guess people are still making fun of me or not believing that God had showed me those things up in Western Kentucky whenever I almost went to jail and lost my liberty twice within a 10-day period of them thinking that I was going to create electrical disturbances by blowing up their Kentucky dam on the Tennessee River. Twice that happened. So whenever I make these videos and I put this stuff out there, I mean it with love and contentment. I really do. Because the Father has always sent messengers, prophets, teachers, instructors, before God basically lifts his hand off of the masses and basically looks down at Lucifer and the angels that followed after Lucifer that are no longer considered angels but devils, demons, evil spirits, and say, okay, this is what they asked for. Give them what they asked for. Give them what they ordered. This was on the menu. This was obviously the way that they wanted to go. I'm going to take away my protection that I've been protecting them with throughout all these years. And obviously they bit in the hand that was feeding them because they wasn't grateful in how that the Heavenly Father was protecting them. And they've basically been turned over to a reprobate mind to believe a lie. And now they have been damned. That's the reason why we're seeing all the irregular weather patterns. The forces of nature go absolutely bonkers. And if it's not going bonkers on one end of the earth, it's going bonkers on the other end of the earth. Just like the Bible teaches that these will be the humongous, horrendous sorrows that will fall upon the humanity in the last days, just as a woman traveling with a child, that as the child gets closer and closer, the pains now become closer together, and also the pains become more relentless as the woman is getting ready to deliver the child. There towards the last, she actually thinks that she's fixing to die, that she can't bear the pain no more. You started out with small pains. Started out like 15-minute intervals. Then it went from 10-minute intervals to a level 5 in pain. Then it went from 15-minute to 5-minute intervals. And the level of pain went up to an 8. And, once it goes up to like a 9 or a 10 and your intervals are happening like every 2 minutes, you're in the middle of a storm. That's basically the only way to describe a woman that's bearing a child in the form of a natural birth. That's what's happening with our planet right now. And if we're not smart enough to figure out that we are truly living in the last days with this message that God has given me to give to the audience pertaining to the Windmill Ministries missions, if people ain't smart enough to grasp a hold of that, well then, you hadn't seen nothing yet, my friend, whenever it comes to massive amounts of electrical disturbances that will come in one form or the other, in addition to the plagues, in addition to the famines, in addition to the diseases, in addition to the wars, in addition to all the above. Right now, he's thrown us off into a sick bed, which in actuality, before COVID ever hit, we was already in a sick bed, but we was living our lives in such of a nonchalant way, we really didn't recognize the severity of cancer. We really didn't recognize, some of us did, but we really didn't recognize the severity of Alzheimer's. We really didn't recognize the severity of this and that. I got a military friend right now that, as of yesterday morning, in Lambert, Nashville, Tennessee hospital, had to have one of his legs cut off from his knee down because his feet, he had gotten gangrene, I guess working in a factory, standing up about 8 or 10 hours at a time and not being able to move, and none of the circulation went through his feet, but his feet had basically started deteriorating and dying on his legs. And I guess the reason why that they're cutting off the left one right now is because gangrene had set up so badly, they was afraid that it was going to get into his blood system. So they're going to wait about 30 days and cut off the other leg. So there's problems out there. Trust me. I talk to people every day. I'm aware of what's going on. And other people should be too. But you should be aware of the Bible. There was a primary principle in the scholars putting the Bible together pertaining to the teachings of Christ, especially after a group of people working through King Augusta decided after 300 years that it was in fact an authentic gospel. And the reason why is because it is a book of warnings and advisories. And God is instructing society through the teachings of Christ and through other prophets of God that has been recorded. God is putting these things out there for a farewell, for a warning for us. That way, maybe we will embark up into the warnings to the degree that God will stop or intervene towards these horrible, horrible things that's going to be falling upon to humanity. And as long as we're living in the type of lifestyles that we're living, especially out west, I've never seen, whenever I went over into California, I guess it was in 2012, I think it was. Yeah, it was 2012. I went up towards San Francisco and seen a group of people out protesting in front of their Merrill Lynch bank that's got the big bull pertaining to the 1%ers versus the 99%ers. And I just got through coming off of a tour going over to the island where the prison over there was, where Al Capone, they had Al Capone. And as I was coming back to my automobile, I noticed this big clash of people, probably a couple thousand people out there. And a lot of their policemen was on horses, but a lot of them were just standing around, hoping it didn't nothing get out of hand. But as I was standing there looking around, and I promise you, I actually witnessed this. I seen this tall guy. He had to have been at least 6'2", maybe 6'4", kind of sandy blonde headed, stripped down bare naked. Didn't even have a sock on, but he did have one sock on, which was over his tallywhacker. A red sock. But other than that, he was exposing everything else. There was like 20 cops in behind him looking at this guy like looking at a pork chop. And they all had on their suits, they all had on their helmets, they all had on their blackjacks, in addition to all the other people that was holding up all these signs about the 99%ers versus the 1%ers. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm looking at this guy, and I'm looking at the whole scenario, the situation, because that guy that was standing there bare naked, other than having a tallywhacker over a sock over his tallywhacker, which I guess that defies him towards him not being what you would say buck naked. He was only partially naked. He was allowed to stand out there in the audience in broad daylight, holding a sign, picketing about the 1%ers versus the 99%ers. And I'm thinking to myself, as I'm looking at this out west, I'm thinking to myself, if this was in the state of Tennessee, they would call somebody up with a medical team to come out and gather that human being up and basically put that human being in a mental ward towards trying to figure out what was that problem with that human being. Male or female, wouldn't matter. But I guess out there, any and everything goes. You know, I've seen some of them string bikinis that those girls wear, riding on the sidewalks with their roller skates and stuff, and all the nudist bars, nudity beaches and stuff out there. I've seen the way that those people live out there, regardless whether it's on the south end or the north end. Now, I'm not saying that everybody is like that, but what I am saying is that they are so liberal out there, so liberal, including Denver, Colorado. I've lived in Denver, Colorado on 3 different occasions. Like I've said earlier, I've done a lot of traveling. The Western world is so intensely loose with their liberalism. I promise you, you could open up a marijuana church, a worshiping center somewhere out west, and within a matter of hours, no more than days, you would have people coming to it. You would have people coming to it. Just like up in Nashville, and I'm sure they're everywhere around now, towards having LGBTQ worshiping centers where these people all get together knowing that they have these exotic lifestyles, and more than likely even the minister, him or her, because nowadays I guess it don't matter, will basically get in behind the pulpit and say a few things out of the Bible, maybe talk for 15 or 20 minutes on the same subject, and I guarantee it won't be the subject towards degrading the homosexuals or the lesbians out of the King James. It'll probably be a completely different Bible, related around God, and using Jesus Christ as some sort of a front, but it will be totally offbeat pertaining to the authenticity of the King James. And because of that, as far as I'm concerned, it's a cult. You can call it, you can name it, you can claim it, whatever you want to name it and claim it, but as far as I'm concerned, once it goes to that point, you just as well be a Satan worshiper and going and cutting goats' throats and having sacrifices and doing whatever that the satanic worshiping centers do, including the Wiccans, which is less than about a quarter of a mile from where I live right here. As far as I'm concerned, you just must be going to a Satanist worshiping center. If you're going to be going to a gay atmosphere worshiping center, knowing that God and the presence of God pertaining to the Holy Spirit is not in that church. That's the reason why I make reference, and I'm not picking on nobody. I'm just telling them what the King James Version Bible teaches, that whenever you marry 2 people, it's supposed to be holy matrimony. The word holy represents righteousness. The word righteousness is a standoff in regards towards a righteous, holy God. 2 people can marry, but just because they marry don't mean that they're marrying under the influence of being holy matrimony. And they may be loyal, and their type of love may be the type of love that you would think to yourself, if you knew this couple, that they just cared about one another so deeply. And I'm sure in some sort of a profound, pathetic, perverted way, they probably do. Because even Jesus acknowledged that there was 2 different types of love. Whenever Jesus talked about that sinners love sinners, but what thank do they pertaining to the type of love that they have? It's not true agape love. It's not true righteous, holy love. There's a difference. Sinners love sinners. Even Jesus acknowledged that whenever he was with us. It's not to say that they don't have love for one another, but their love is a different type of love. It's a different type of love, and it's not the type of love that's the everlasting love. Now, they may think it is. Some of them people, I'm sure, they'll probably die in their belief, to the point that they'll just swear that they are close to God, because God has blessed them tremendously, because they got deep pockets, and they've had a life of rally throughout their lifestyle. I'm pretty sure that there'll be people that would die believing that. But whenever they awaken in the same place that we're all going to awaken in, pertaining to the great white throne judgment, and they hear the Heavenly Father say, "Depart from me, for I've never known thee," that will be one of the saddest days in human history, and the worst day of all worst in human history will be whenever God releases the Antichrist, the false prophet, Satan, whichever category that you want to put him in, Lucifer, back into the realm of the environment on a spiritual level. At this point in time, everything will be in a spiritual level. Whenever God releases Lucifer to go and deceive the nations once again into Gog and Magog, you can't deceive them again unless you've deceived them the first time, which is where we are right now. But the saddest day for all humanity, above and beyond all the horrors and all the sadness that's ever fallen upon the humanity since the beginning of time, will be on that day, whenever it says that fire come down from New Jerusalem that consumed them, that fell for the bait the last and final time towards following after the Luciferian Lucifer. Because at that point in time, those people will be separated from God for eternity, and that in and of itself will be torment. That in and of itself will be torment. And then, according to the Bible, God will take Lucifer, those that followed after Lucifer in the spirit world, because there was a third of the angels that followed with him, unless they're in a very, very repenting state. I can't tell you for sure what's going to happen with all of them. I do know, according to the Bible, that he's going to grab up a great deal of them, and he's going to cast them in hell, a living, tormented hell, where they will be living, screaming, day and night, night and day, for eternity. But they'll never be released out of that prison called hell, and they will never ever have a chance to be influential with not only the human race but also the spiritual race, because they was the ones that started this calamity. They was the ones that started the war. They was the ones that started what they started up in heaven to begin with. And if people don't understand that and identify towards what the Bible teaches about that, well, then once more, it's not my fault. I can only put it out there as a messenger and tell you how that God has given me the sense to be able to interpret what's going to happen, because the Bible says very clearly that blessed are they who have part in the first resurrection. And in total, the way I understand it, because during the Great Tribulation period, right now he's thrown us off into a sick bed, but as we're into this sick bed, we will eventually evolve, if we don't watch, over into Great Tribulation. In the existences of Great Tribulation, the Bible talks about, after the opening of the seventh seal, or during the opening of the seventh seal, that there will be so many people, the way it describes it in the Bible, that they will be as the sands of the sea, which is basically an endless amount of people, an endless amount of number of people, that once they have realized what's going on supernaturally in the heavens and on the earth, that all this stuff is real. This isn't our imagination. These things are actually occurring, okay? Once they identify that it is real, whenever it comes time for the false prophet and the Antichrist to actually rise during the Great Tribulation period of receiving the mark of the beast, which is part of the New World Order, according to the Bible, it will be thousands and millions of people that will either die by starvation, or they'll die by being beheaded, according to the Bible. Now, I know that the message that I'm giving you right now is not a likable, predominant message. I know it's not a message that a lot of people like to hear. And that's probably one reason why, for the past 30 plus years, that I never did gain what you would call a support team or a congregation that stood with the Windmill Ministries, was because of the severity of the message. I realize that. But I also realize this. I'm still alive with the same message that I began with going back 40 years ago about the Antichrist whenever I made the first telephone call to the White House. I realize this. God is a supreme being above and beyond all other supreme beings, and God can turn this around if mankind is willing to turn it around. But if mankind ain't willing to turn it around, then God, once more, is going to lift his hand off of the planet, and we are going to see chaotic scenes, just like what recently we seen about 3 weeks ago pertaining to the earthquake over in Turkey and Syria, that they claim about 45,000 people alone in Turkey has died. Probably be another 2,000 to 5,000 that would die because they got injuries and wasn't getting the proper medical help. And that ain't counting the people that died in Syria. Then they had another earthquake a few nights ago that added misery on top of misery. That earthquake was actually felt, I think, all the way into Libya or somewhere. We got rivers drying up over there. We've got water reserves as far as watersheds and tributaries that's drying up all over the planet. We've got all this weird weather, harsh weather, that's either causing extreme drought or extreme wetness to the point of flooding, deluges. I mean, we've been exposed to that over here in the east of the Mississippi. And as we're seeing these things intensify and come closer to closer, the way that Jesus, in the teachings of the King James Version Bible, expressed it, he expressed it or explained it in the terminology of a woman bearing forth childbearing pains. That as she's getting closer and closer and closer to the actual delivery, the pains will become closer together and they'll be more harsh. And that's what we're seeing. And if people that get a hold of this message and listen to this and they still can't comprehend this, or they still think that I'm the bad guy because I'm trying to help you, well then obviously me and you are on a completely different page, okay? And obviously you don't want help, and it's not so much that you don't believe me, but you don't believe the Bible that I'm teaching that I do believe in. So either way, I'm fighting against a very, very strong wall of resistance that I've been fighting against now for the past 30 plus years, since 9 tapes went to the White House. Either way, I'm familiar with this type of resistances that my brother was not. And because of it, these people, certain people around here in this neighborhood, helped drive my younger brother off into an early grave because he couldn't handle that type of pressure that the courts in Weakley County are going to be held accountable for one day, because they sat idly by and they let it fester as far as dereliction of duty. Under the Freedom of Information Act, I know attorneys can get a hold of this information. I don't know if it's just everybody that can, but if you'll contact Weakley County Sheriff's Department during the time that I first come back here in 2014, from 2014 to 2017, up until they actually arrested me, like 2 weeks after my brother died, maybe 3 weeks after my brother died, that I was still in a grieving stage towards, you will see where my brother and I reached out to the officials again and again and again. A whole pattern of telephone calls that was initiated to the sheriff's department, even to the extent of hiring attorneys and going before the courts again and again. And if anybody that gets a hold of this material from this particular neighborhood, from this community, if they deny that, they're lying out their teeth. And they know that I can prove it. They know that I can prove it because the vast majority of all them incidences, of all them telephone calls, I purposely went up to Dresden, Tennessee, and made sure I got a copy of. Again and again and again and again. In addition to all the copies that my brother already had of basically the same family out here that he was having trouble with way before I ever come out here in 2014. There was basically already a Hatfield and McCoy type environment out here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255, or 430 Beech Grove Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. There was already war brewing out here and had been war brewing out here for like 5 or 6, 7 years before I ever come back here in 2014. And then whenever I come back here in 2014, that's whenever a great deal of the people decided that they was going to jump on board. Well, that's what you call in a football game a pile-on. And that's what happened. There was a pile-on that the Weakley County courts was witnessing and watching, as well as Mike Wilson, Tommy Thomas, all the people that's engaged with law enforcement in this area in Weakley County, or at least in Northwest Tennessee, in Weakley County. It was a pile-on, and they continued to keep coming and coming and coming. Even after my brother was dead, they was driving around here falsely accusing me of killing my brother and having sex with my brother and all other kinds of stuff. Never did get nobody that I know of, maybe 1 or 2 families close to me, that come over here and said, Juby, we really are sorry about the loss of your brother. There was only 1 or 2 families that done that. The rest of them was right in behind the maniac that was driving by here routinely 10, 12, 15 times a day, honking his horn, crying out, spewing out things. That was some of the most ungodliest stuff that I'd ever had to have been subjected to. Ever had to have been subjected to. And the bad thing about it was, it wasn't just one at that point in time. It was a whole, it basically turned into a mob. There was at least, I'm going to say at least 10 to 12, maybe 15 different families that at that time, I guess they thought it was open season because Juby had come back. Juby come back to Northwest Tennessee? Really? After these people had done already degraded me and talked about me and put me in every category that you could think of towards basically monster sizing me, including people that go to church. Good sounding, moral, Christian people. I can't believe. Oh, yeah. A matter of fact, the majority of it, that's where it got started from. You know why it got started from there? Because they didn't want to believe the things that Juby was telling them about going all the way back into 1989 about the first seal being opened. They didn't want to accept the miracles that had happened in Juby's life that Juby kept telling people about again and again and again, about the 2 mysterious hands that come out of nowhere. After he lost over 9.5 units of blood and had to be operated on towards removing his spleen and taking 64 big wide steel staples, pulling his both pieces of skin together after the doctors just basically crammed my intestines back into a cavity hole and was hoping for the best. And God once more had his protected hand upon to me, even though my father attacked me about 30 days later and tried to finish me off. And then went to the authorities in Kenton, Tennessee, trying to do something about it. And they basically patted him on the back and put me in a mental institution, even though I'd never been involved in a mental institution in my whole entire life. Talk about off the wall. This is what you call true justice? That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. whenever the people that's supposed to be the people that impugnates the justice upon to the people is that far out of focus, that's whenever God the Father steps in. Just like he did during the flood, just like he did during the destruction of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, just like he stepped in into other historical facts that we know that's not necessarily in the King James Version Bible, but we know historically there has been whole cities, whole communities devastated either by disease, volcanoes, earthquakes, wars, or whatever. Whenever God gets tired of something and he lifts his hand up off of that society, up off of that people, it's not that he's not still protecting certain people, because he is. He's still with certain people. But as far as dealing with the masses, he's given them over to a reprobate mind, just like the Bible talks about, and let them believe a lie and be damned. All these little old towns around here that's dried up, that used to have predominant factories, and used to be an area that people really wanted to live in, raise their families, and have their families raise up their families in, that dream is over with. That dream has been over with here in Northwest Tennessee for quite some times now, pertaining to all these little old towns that's basically drying up. And the elders, the pillars of the community, those that was involved in all this to begin with, still don't get it. That they're the ones responsible that should be held accountable for what has occurred here. They have basically stolen our children's future right out from underneath them because they was not willing to do the proper and right things. A matter of fact, I had an individual that I actually fell with whenever I fell off the A.L. Smith building in 1979. I fell approximately 4 stories. His father was Billy Earl Davis that used to run the store down here, that was the brother to Gary Davis that had his arms burnt off. Both of them was my first cousins. So this would make his son, Robert Earl, my second cousin. The same as Sonny Davis's Captain Hook. They called him Captain Hook because he didn't have no hands. The same as Captain Hook. His sons and daughters would be my second cousins. But I was working with this individual the day that I fell off a 4-story building and broke both legs, crushed both ankles in about 25 pieces apiece, crushed 3 vertebrae, ruptured 2 discs, and broke both arms. Just talked to him less than a week ago. You know, one of the first things that he had to say about this area, because he's always been a traveler, he's worked up north, he was an iron worker, he now works with the military, towards basically being a foreman, towards loading stuff, unloading stuff. He's had a really, really good life, a good turn of things that's occurred, other than him having an accident and crushing one of his daggum ankles a long time ago, similar towards both of my ankles being crushed. I think that happened up north, but he wound up getting paid substantially for it, to where I only got peanuts down here in Tennessee because of the workman comp laws, which is another completely different issue. I ain't talking about that right now. But what I am talking about, that one of the things that he talked about, as far as his 2 daughters, that as soon as they got old enough to drive an automobile, they struck out and went elsewhere. And according to him, are doing very well for themselves. Doing very well. But they had to go somewhere. They had to migrate somewhere to do it. That's my whole point in this area. Yeah, Martin, Tennessee has grown because it was smart enough to have a college. And because it attracted that, it attracted some investments over here pertaining to having somewhat of a working force. But, you know, whenever you're dealing with 30,000 people in Weakley County, 30,000 people in Obion County, and you only got 2 or 3 factories to choose from, and you either can't do the work, or people didn't like you to the point that now you've got a bad score on your report card to the point that they ain't going to hire you again, well, that leaves you with one or 2 things. You either do without, or you get ready to drive to 3 or 4 other counties over, which sometimes requires 60, 70 miles one way and 60, 70 miles back another way. Well, if you're not making decent money in doing that, you're throwing good money to bad. And you wonder how come the suicide rates went up? You wonder how come all these people has related around to drugs and throwing their lives away? It wasn't that they have thrown their lives away. All they're doing is finishing their lives. The people that actually threw their lives away was the people that embarked upon this stuff that has caused this to happen, towards giving all our jobs away and basically selling us out. So whenever I make these videos, whenever I tell you stuff of places that I've lived, what's considered normal, what's considered abnormal, what used to be around here versus what's no longer around here, I'm telling you, I got a whole library of stuff that 99.9% of it I can validate and prove. Good luck to each and every one of us. I want to say God bless you for listening. God bless America. Especially God bless our troops towards obviously where we're heading down this endless road of disaster after disaster after disaster. And if it don't come in one form, it's coming into another form. And we want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your prayers. And if you don't mind, please remember the individual that I just got through talking about that had to have a leg removed. He's originally from New Mexico, but he's been living here now for quite a long while. And he was engaged with military affairs, in which I don't think the military had nothing to do with his problems that he's dealing with now. Matter of fact, it's the military that's paying for the operations. But if you don't mind, please keep all of our military veterans in your prayers. Thank you, and shalom.